personal views and opinions expressed by our podcast guests are their own and are not legal advice or official statements by their organizations. Hello, my name is Debbie Reynolds, and this is the Data Diva Talks Privacy Podcast, where I discuss data privacy issues with industry leaders around the world with information that businesses need to know now. Today, I always say I have a special guest, but this is super true this time. So I have Joy Heath Rush on the show. She is the CEO of the International Legal Technology Association, which is called ILTA. Let's see. Let me think back to how Joy and I met. I don't know how we met.
It's been a minute or two.
Yes, I don't know how we. I don't know how we met, but you and I ended up at the same firm. You were working with the firm. I was doing consulting for the firm when they were trying to do digital transformation with legal documents. And that was a long, long time ago. And I have been so thrilled to see all the progress that you made in your career. I think from the moment that I met you, some people are just born leaders and you're just one of those people. So I feel like you are just unflappable. Like nothing I could say would throw you for a loop. If I told you, aliens just landed down the hall, you were like, okay, we're going to do this.
Yeah. I would say, what are the next steps? And I feel the same way about you, by the way. It's great to be able to watch someone's career that you admire so much, and you say, God, it's great when you see capable people advance and do cooler and cooler things. It gives you faith in the world.
Oh, it does. It absolutely does. So I've been, I had the pleasure of attending ILTA in 2019. Mm-hmm. And I attended that, the kickoff session that they had in the big conference room, or the big, I don't know what they call it room. It was gigantic.
Auditorium.
Yeah. So there were over 3,000 people in that room. And I could not have been more proud, because I felt like, the woman I met many years ago is on the stage. And to me, you've always been that person.
Well, thank you. As I said, we have a great mutual admiration society, and you say I'm a special guest. I feel like I'm with the special person doing the special podcast. So all y'all listening out there, if you think it's sappy, you're just going to have to get over it, because when people admire each other, that's what happens.
Yeah. I would love to talk just a little bit about your career journey. So you've had very interesting jobs. I feel like all of them fit you kind of for the time. And I think a lot of people in their career, they do very similar things. You know what I mean? Like even if they go to a different company, they do similar things. And I don't feel like you ever did that. So tell me a little bit about your career.
Yeah, that's a great comment. And I'll tell you, when I left Sidley Austin after 28 years, someone said to me, how did it feel about leaving Sidley after being in the same job for 28 years? I said, what in the world led you to believe I was in the same job for 28 years? I was probably in 21 different jobs during that 28 years, and some of them at the same time. I studied kind of I have an unusual degree. It's a BSFS, which is a Bachelor of Science in Foreign Service from Georgetown. I intended to go into the State Department and be a career Foreign Service officer. And the last thing I wanted to do is touch a computer. I was the most computer phobic person that ever was on the planet. And sometimes life doesn't turn out. That didn't turn out to be the right choice for me. And I took a job right after college where I was working in office. This was 1981. And we had word processing equipment. No one had computers in 1981, and not many. It was word processing equipment. And my boss kept wanting me to go to training, and I did everything I could. The dog ate my homework. Man, I did everything I could to get out of doing that. And I was sure I was going to get fired because I was so computer phobic or so technology phobic. So I went to my first class, and I called back to the office at lunchtime, and I was like, this is great. This is the greatest thing. I love this. And I've been in technology ever since. And that company, it wasn't a law firm per se, but it was one of these places kind of like Regis is now, where there were a bunch of people renting space, and it's mostly lawyers. So I was working on legal documents all the time. I fell in love with it. I fell in love with the practice of law. I fell in love with technology. I learned a ton. Then I went to Sidley Austin and as a word processing manager. And the very first personal computer in the entire firm was in my department in Washington. When I used to get yelled at by the head of word processing in Chicago, it's like, you're trying to put us out of jobs. I'm like, don't you get it? This thing is the future, right? You got to learn this stuff in order for us to have a future. It's interesting. I know my dear friend Judy Flournoy. I know you know.
Yes.
There are several of us kind of in our generation, so to speak. She has a theory that a lot of us got into technology as women because we could type. Because in the early days of technology, it was all keyboard. Everything was
exactly.
It was all text. And then it kind of went from there. And I married, technology doing things fast with what I knew about the practice and the relationships with the lawyers. And I got to do more and more interesting things. And the thing I miss the most about not being in a law firm is the lawyers. They're motivated and smart and have high standards, and I like the pace at which they work. And then I went from doing all kinds of different things in my law practice, including litigation support in the days when we did bait stamping by hand. You and I talked about that at breakfast one day.
We did, yes.
You'd see timesheets with lawyers spending 12 hours a day, 5 days a week, bait stamping documents by hand. Following what was happening in that area and then getting into applications and multimedia. Then I went to work for a provider of legal technology where I was able to take a lot of skills I learned about working with lawyers as well as technology to selling technology. And then I got my job at ILTA 2.5 years ago, which I feel like every thread in my entire career kind of wove together to this point. I had been an ILTA volunteer, I had been an ILTA sponsor, I had been working with lawyers and technology for more than 30 years. And I have tremendous passion for the nonprofit world and for the mission of the organization. So that was a really long answer to a really short question, but I will tell my professors back at Georgetown, if there are any of them that haven't retired, you didn't waste your time. I use my diplomacy skills a lot in my job.
And you have to. You're a diplomat for sure because you're dealing with people with different backgrounds and different experiences and trying to get them to work together.
And different agendas.
Different agendas.
Yeah. Right. That's a big part of it.
I know you have on your profile, which is on LinkedIn, you say a lover of people. That's totally perfect. I think that's a good description of you because it's, I feel like you're just a natural leader. So you know how to take whatever skills someone has and be able to put it to good use. And I think one of the hardest things you could ever do is run like a large volunteer-based organization, right? Because you're asking people to do things that they're not actually getting paid for, right? Some people.
No, that's exactly right. I mean, people will ask me how big my organization is, like how many people in our quote unquote workforce. I said, well, it kind of depends on how you count. There are not quite 30 of us on the staff, but there are hundreds of volunteers. And what's so fantastic is you see these people who have really tough day jobs, Debbie. I mean, it's not like these people are sitting back and eating bonbons and their day job. They have very demanding day jobs, yet they give huge amounts of time and energy and love to the organization. And you said something about my profile saying lover of people. They say everybody has a superpower and everybody has super skills. My superpower is I just love. I mean, I have a lot of that. And it's amazing what you can accomplish with it. And I think that's one reason I connect with the volunteers, because they have such huge love for the organization. And one of the things that's amazing about my staff is that they have a volunteer spirit, and that's fantastic.
Yeah, right. We are very similar in that regard. I taught myself computers. It was not formally trained. I
Mhm.
started out in multimedia. I do all my own marketing stuff because I started doing that.
Yeah, 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 yep.
That's how I taught myself to do computers. So very similar in that regard. I think, when we think about legal, to me, privacy is sort of wound in there somewhere. So before it was kind of like an asterisk on maybe a long sheet of paper about stuff you had to do. It was kind of, oh yeah, yeah, we have to think about privacy, especially when you're working with cases or working
Mhm.
with companies that have data, all around the world. It was always kind of a feature in, a thread in legal technology. And now, since all of the regulations are coming about or becoming more stringent in terms of fines and things like that, I've been surprised about it becoming kind of its own industry in and of itself. What are your thoughts about that?
That's a great question, and I will say I always love to take problems back to what I call kind of first principles. So, is privacy is something that we didn't even think about when we were all paper,
Right.
because people spent enormous amounts of time filing paper, putting the paper in really secure places, locked in locked rooms, locked in locked file drawers. You had all kinds of instructions about not reading your documents on the train and stuff where people can see them. And nobody made that connection right away when we started having things that were digital. And so you go back and you say, oh, I still have to protect data. Oh, okay. But now it's a different kind of data. The problem you're trying to solve is keeping client confidentiality. And it's funny because I was on a panel recently at Penn State University Law School, and we were talking to 3Ls about the difference between the technology they use at school and the technology they'll use at a law firm. And, this is really interesting because these are digital natives.
Right.
These kids have always had the internet and cell phones. They don't remember anything else. If you distill it down, the big difference is that the data that they use on their computers and their phones today belongs to them. Once they get into practice, almost none of it belongs to them.
Right.
And that's the shift we need to make. And that's, I think, what we need to reinforce for people to say, click, oh, privacy, of course, this data doesn't belong to me. I'm a custodian.
That's right. Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. I like to tell people, when you have someone else's data, you're a steward of that data. It doesn't belong to you, even though you can touch it, right? You can do different things with it, but maybe you shouldn't be doing those things.
Okay, that's exactly right. And if you think about it, in a law department is a little bit different, but I think in a law firm, the only data that really belongs to you are like your financial and personnel records. I mean, that's oversimplification, but
Right.
it's the things that you need to run your business. Everything else belongs to a client.
Right, absolutely. And then too, in organizations, as I worked, in the litigation support area and the e-discovery before it had an E and all that stuff. But when you're working in those areas, you're protecting data in different ways, right?
Right.
So you're protecting it because maybe it's a trade secret or there's a privilege issue or something. So this is just a different type of protection for the data.
Yeah, and there's one of the things that brought this home to me a lot too is the Sidley general counsel of kind of my early technology days, and he's retired now. It's absolute prince of a person. But he once said to me, two things keep me up at night. The first is that the courts will ask me to produce something and I can't because I don't know where it is. And the second is the courts will ask me to destroy something and I can't because I don't know where it is. So the flip side of data privacy, in order to keep something secure, you know where it is.
Right.
And that's the dots that I think sometimes people don't connect. If we don't know that stuff is sitting in your Gmail, if we don't know that stuff is sitting on your phone or on your home computer, there's nothing we can do to secure it.
Right.
If it's inside the bank vault, we can lock the vault, but if it's sitting on the floor in the bank lobby, there's not a lot we can do.
Right. And I think the cloud complicates that issue now
Yes.
because before it was like you had to get a permission to install a certain application. You had to get, approval for the money to do that, where now people are signing up for these free apps and they're storing things in the cloud in different places. And it makes, the cybersecurity folks, it makes their job harder when they don't know where things are.
Well, I think for people like you who are working with organizations and data privacy all the time, you have to help communicate to people that, and I know you do, that the cloud is not monolithic. There are many, many clouds, and not all clouds are created equal. So
Right.
to say, all clouds are inherently insecure is not correct. But people have to do their due diligence about cloud security and what's happening, rather than just saying, oh, all cloud applications are fine, or no cloud applications are fine. I was doing a session for a bunch of law firm general counsel a year and a half or so ago. We were talking about law firm kind of resistance to cloud technology. And it was myself and Michelle Gossmeyer from Denton's, and a bunch of other folks were there too. But I said, raise your hand if you use the cloud in some aspect in your law firm. And almost no hands went up. Then I said, raise your hand if you use DocuSign. And every single hand in the room went up. And I said, you do get that it's only in the cloud, right? And they're kind of looking at each other like, what? But it helped them see that it's not all one. It's not one size fits all when it comes to the cloud.
Right.
And
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like the campaign calling it the cloud makes it seem so nice and fluffy, right? It makes it so innocent. Oh, it's in the cloud. We don't have to worry about it. It's in the cloud or
it's
whatever.
riding on a rainbow into the cloud.
Yeah, I always tell people, I'm like, yeah, it's basically on someone else's computer. It's not on your computer, but you still have responsibility for that data. So they're not going to do everything for you. They're just hosting the information for you. So yeah, it's funny. So I have seen a transition where I've had people say they didn't want stuff in the cloud because they thought it was insecure, and they thought it was more secure if it was down the hall from them, to, oh my God, we have to get stuff in the cloud because we can't have stuff on premise. So, I think you're right. We need to have more nuanced conversations about the cloud. It can't be the cloud is all bad or whatever. And it's so funny because I asked someone many years ago who was against the cloud, and I said, where is the internet? And they're like, I'm like, don't you have like a Gmail account? Yeah, well, that's in the cloud. It's not on your computer. So I just have to tell them.
Well, and I think that you talked about cybersecurity professionals, but people that are working in data privacy like you too, I think even more so, you have to deal with regulations. It's not just the technology. And even within the 50 United States, there are a multiplicity of regulations. You get out of the United States and you have one set for New Zealand and one set for Germany. And what is it? Argentina has some new ones that are very challenging. So keeping up with that, and for global organization to try to be aware of and manage to the standards of all of these multiple jurisdictions is like, it's impossible to keep on top of it. Between that and multiple clouds, you really have to have experts who focus on that 100% of the time.
I agree. I agree. What thing in the privacy realm, either in business or personally, kind of concern you the most that's happening now?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I would say, I was very struck by the documentary, The Social Dilemma. I think many
Hmm.
people have seen that, and kind of the algorithm and how your private information is even seen differently by different people, kind of their lens in the algorithm. I'm not saying either good nor bad. I think that's up to a person's value judgment, but
Hmm.
I'm not sure enough people are educated about it. So I
Hmm.
would say that probably the number one concern I have is that people don't know when they're surrendering their rights to privacy because they don't understand enough about the technology or about the requirements. And a lot of identity theft and things like that happen to people are because they have willingly surrendered their personal information to someone else that they had every reason to believe was using it for good purpose, but other people were able to take advantage of it. So education, lack of education, to me, that's a very, very, very big deal in the privacy front. I think the second one is, and this is much more for business than personal, but there are personal applications too, is about law enforcement. I mean, I come from a police family. I've always been a fan of law enforcement, but you have to understand where law enforcement's boundaries begin and end with your rights in whatever country or city you live as a citizen. This has certainly been a big concern of large law firms and clouds is, okay, what if my client data, again, it's not my data, it's my client's data. Mm-hmm. I'm a steward of it. I've got it in the cloud, and law enforcement issues a subpoena against that data. What do I do? And again, it's about being educated. It's knowing what the risks are, because nothing is 100% bad and nothing is 100% good. It's figuring out in the continuum what the risk is, what the reward is, and what you're willing to risk. So it's kind of your personal data and what law enforcement is looking for. Those two things are related, but it's being educated about what happens to your data, whether it's yours or your company's or your clients.
Yeah. And I always tell people, when you go into, working with a company on privacy stuff, it's never going to work if you go in there like, Alexander Haig, like I'm in charge now. That's never going to happen, right? But a lot of it is really talking about being transparent with the client about what the laws are, what their data touches that applies to those laws, and then they have to choose what their risk appetite is. Do you really want to do X, Y, and Z? And I see some people go way overboard with stuff where, for me, I always try to talk about it in kind of a common sense way. So being able to make sure it's reasonable for what you're doing and not go crazy.
No, and actually there's a great, I think, analogy there to disaster recovery planning. So if you are in California, Southern California, you're going to plan more for wildfires and earthquakes than you are for tornadoes.
Right.
Tornadoes don't really happen in Southern California. Mm-hmm. If you're in Chicago, you're not so worried about hurricanes, right? But tornadoes and cold are a big deal. So it's understanding the threat landscape, the risk landscape, and managing to that. And I think that applies equally for data privacy. There's actually a lot of corollaries between disaster recovery planning and data privacy protection planning.
Absolutely. That and data retention is a huge issue. As you know, in legal, it's, an epidemic of data, too much data. Right. Kept for entirely too long, and so I think the privacy laws are really pushing the boundaries with that, saying that you really have to have a purpose to retain the data. It can't be just, well, I don't know, let's just keep it just because, so being able to have a purpose, I think will really push the needle on people thinking more about what they retain and why.
Yeah, I think, and again, it gets back to why. It's like if people understand, I'll go back to that example of the law students. So, someone's got to tell them that data doesn't belong to them. Mm-hmm. Then they'll be like, oh, it's kind of like, think about back when you were a kid and if ever you spilled something on a library book, oh my God, that's not my book, right?
Right.
But you had to know it wasn't your book.
Right.
In this case, people coming into the practice have to learn this is not my book. This belongs to my client. It belongs to Ford Motor Company or General Electric or Deloitte. It's not mine. And that's where it starts.
Yeah. Right. Be the defensible deletion or making sure that you're, going back through the data, make sure that you're not keeping more than you should. I know a lot of times what happens on many cases, once the discovery stuff and the heavy lifting with the documents are done, it's sort of like an abandoned amusement park.
Yeah, I always call it a landfill. You're actually kinder than me. And people are always worried that there's a diamond bracelet somewhere in this 30-acre landfill.
Mhm.
And is that worth the risk?
Right.
And it's consistent application of the policy too. It not kind of
Right.
being voluntary, but it being centrally managed so that it's, oh, well, we're following the retention policy if it's the New York office, but we're not following it if it's the San Francisco office or whatever. It's
Right.
yeah, not something you can do.
So how has COVID impacted you and your organization in a privacy sense? I know so much has changed for all of us,
Yeah.
but I'm curious.
That's a really interesting question. I would say the digitization of personal connections has impacts on privacy in ways that you don't necessarily realize. So, um, if I'm at an in-person event where there are 50 people and I'm across the room, they might not be able to get a good look at me, or they might not be able to see my badge and see what it says. But if I'm on the Zoom screen, I'm in a nice box, I'm nicely centered, you can see my smile. And because we're taught to do this, it's got my name and my organization right there in the box, so you can totally see it. You're always identifying yourself in ways that I think we didn't when we were together in person. That's an
Right.
interesting play on it. I also think that, one of the issues we encounter at ILTA is we have members, we have sponsors. They're all members of our community and valued members of our community, but they interact, members and business partners interact with each other in different ways than members with members and business partners with business partners.
Right.
And so with all of the contacts being digital, the opt-in, I want to provide my contact information or I don't. And what is that contact information? And how is it going to be used? And when all the contacts are digital, people are thinking more about that. So I think that being aware of your digital presence and the potential privacy implications of a bigger digital presence is probably something where people don't connect too much. Yeah.
Right. And then too, when we were in the office or having phone calls instead of video calls, you wouldn't see like the background of what's happening, people walking past, pets and different things. And that's kind of a way that you're kind of almost involuntarily sharing, right?
Okay. You totally are. I mean, like, you can't see the people who are listening, but my cat is looking at Debbie right now because she jumped on my lap while we were talking. Actually, I had a CIO tell me yesterday, or laughing, that as we were thinking about returning to the office, one of his biggest concerns is how he's going to commute with his dog, because he's gotten so used to having his dog with him at home while he's working. But yeah, people can see what's in your house. They can see members of your family walking by. People are exposed to all kinds of private information that they wouldn't have been exposed to before, and you're not thinking about it. I don't know. It's a really intriguing question, and I think that we've seen the good side of that. Like,
Yep.
people are human. They have
Right.
kids that are running around screaming and wearing pots on their heads and everything. We've seen people's pets, and you see what art they have on their walls, and that's very human. It connects us in ways that we couldn't have connected before, but it also reveals more about yourself maybe than you realize, or that you necessarily want people to know.
Yeah. Now you run, so you would typically have before COVID, obviously a lot of different events for
Yes.
ILTA, in person and digital. So now, what are your plans for ILTACON this year?
Oh, I'm so excited to talk about that. Since we saw each other in 2019. Well, last year we were, of course, all digital, and we were so excited about the opportunities that afforded us. I mean, we had 1,100 people who had never attended an ILTACON before that were able to come because it was digital. We had representation from 26 countries. I mean, that's fantastic. Those are the things that digital gives you. But people want to be back together again. We've all heard about COVID fatigue. People are looking for human connection. but there are still restrictions in place we have to manage. So we will be in person. Join us. Yeah, we have limited registration to 600 people, but we have slots open. We have a lot registered, but we still have some openings. Come and register and join us. We'll be at Mandalay Bay in Las Vegas, but it'll be a hybrid event. So digital registration will open next week, and we'll have 600 or so people, members, and then another 600 or so business partners there in person. And then we'll have probably 1,000 or two that'll be joining just digitally, and we'll be trying to connect them. We're doing some really unique and fun things to help people that are there in person connect with the people who are at home or in their offices.
Yeah. That's brilliant. That's brilliant to make it a hybrid event. I don't know. I feel like work after this will be hybrid as well.
I do too. I think the big difference, Debbie, will be that two things. One, we will never or unlikely again be in a place where we're either 100% at home or 100% in the office.
Right.
It's going to be some slider. On some days, 30% will be in the office and 70% will be home. Some days it'll be 50-50. It'll just depend. But that gets to the second thing, is that your office will be a place you can work, not the primary place you work.
Right.
And you have to think about, someone used this phrase yesterday in a meeting I was in, presence with a purpose. And I really liked that. It begins to think about what it is you go to the office for, what can only be done at the office, and then fitting out the office to suit those purposes. In law firms, in the practice of law, but also in litigation support, data privacy, all the places you came from, look how much you learned in an apprenticeship type mode, right? Learning from the person a couple of years ahead of you in their career and working side by side with them and absorbing all that by osmosis. That hasn't been happening the last 13 months in the same way. So if that's going to be one of the main reasons we go back to the office, let's make sure that we've really fitted, supplied, scheduled, made the office a place where learning is a primary goal of being.
Yeah. I always thought that it was crazy that everyone left the house at the same time and went back at the same time. I just didn't understand. And so I would have teams on staggered schedules, and a lot of people didn't, sometimes management didn't like that idea, but it was perfect because people, maybe someone has an errand to run in the morning, or, it lets them pick up their kids at a certain time. And it was great.
I'm always with you about that. And I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, and the federal government, I don't know, I must've been a teenager when they did this, went on what they called flex time. So you could report to the office anywhere between 6 a.m. and 10 a.m., and you could leave anywhere between 2 p.m. and 6 p.m. or whatever that came out to. And that was fantastic. I mean, if I had worked for the federal government, I'd have worked 6 to 2 for sure. I'm totally a person. But I was like you. I always wanted to give people staggered schedules because they're more satisfied.
Oh, yeah.
No one has to deal with traffic, and it actually lets you provide more service to more people at more different hours of the day.
Absolutely. Right. I was able to expand my coverage quite a lot, and people love that. It was great. So hopefully people will start thinking about that. Unfortunately, we have to start thinking about that because of COVID, because we have to work in new ways. But to me, I think this will be a watershed moment for legal, where a lot of times, a lot of things that we were doing just because it had always been done.
Yes, that's right. Yep, that's right. I mean, and I can remember, I used to always have 3 or 4 different projects I'd put in my budget every year, knowing they would be cut. I used to call them sacrificial lamb projects because people didn't have the appetite for it. These were sometimes digital transformation. We used to call it paperless office, soft phones, things like that. They're like, no, it's fine. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, kind of thing. But those issues really got surfaced. I mean, I can't tell you how many technology people I heard from of organizations where they were still printing and marking up pro formas. Well, like, dang, that's really hard now that people are at home. And all of a sudden, there was a real appetite for these business process type projects. And you see big firms putting in systems like ServiceNow and other kind of big enterprise service management systems, because they've realized that there's real bang for the buck and real benefit to be had by having more things that are digital and more things that are processed. Of course, then that's where we have to call Debbie and say, now, what is the implications of this for privacy? I know there have to be some.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's such a big ball of wax and it's so different. So I'm excited because well, as you know, I love digital projects and I love the future. So things that are emerging, I'm always looking ahead to see, what's happening. So people always say, how do you keep up?
No, but your real gift is that you can look at the trends and see where that trend line logically is going to head. But a lot of people love that famous quote from Wayne Gretzky, the hockey player: "Don't skate to where the puck is, skate to where the puck's going to be." And the people right now who are being most successful are the ones that are really gifted at knowing where the puck's going to be. And you're definitely one of those people.
Oh, you're going to make me cry, Joey.
I told y'all listening, we have a mutual admiration society.
Absolutely. So if it was the world according to Joy and we would do everything you say, what would be your wish for privacy, either in the US or around the world? Either, law or technology, anything.
My wish for privacy is that people would recognize the way bad actors could work, and be smart about it. And my secondary one would that well-intentioned people be kind about other people's privacy goofs, and remember that on any given day, it could be you.
Those are good ones. Those are good ones. Yeah, I totally, I had a family meeting recently where we were, because we can't travel, right? We were just like, oh, what's happening in California? What's happening here and there? And I decided to throw out some cyber tips because I'm like, hey, don't click on that link in the email because this is stuff that people are dealing with every day. And I felt like if someone had, clicked on a link and I hadn't told them, I would feel bad, that I could actually, tell them that. So
I think that we are not alone in that. And I've had a lot of fun on Zoom calls with various members of my family who accidentally set their background as something they don't want, or like that famous video that's gone viral about the cat the lawyer that puts the cat Instagram filter on. And it's like, how do I get rid of this? It's actually been kind of fun.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And then, I am not naive enough to think that I know everything about, cyber threats. So I think everyone should be vigilant because you just don't know. These guys, that's all they do 24 hours a day. Think about how they can.
That's exactly right. And it's not just individuals, it's criminal enterprises, it's nation states.
Mm-hmm.
And so the vigilance is super important. And actually one of ILTA's, one of our activities is we have an advisory group called the Legal Set Steering Committee who really focus on security issues and legal. That's their thing. And one of the initiatives they have is called It Takes a Village. It's things that, because security isn't a competitive advantage, Debbie, that. Data privacy isn't a competitive advantage. Mm-hmm. We're only as good as the weakest link in the chain and in the supply chain for legal services. And there is a supply chain. People don't like to think about it, but there is. Mm-hmm. And so if we don't help each other, somewhere somebody else's failure to respect privacy or to manage security is going to affect us.
That's right. Exactly. I always say anybody's problem is everybody's problem. So
okay, I might have to steal that one. I'll remember to attribute it to you.
Please do. It's like, I can't ignore the harm that's happening to someone else and think that's not going to impact me at some point. So yeah. Excellent. Well, this is fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to have you on the show. And keep doing what you're doing as always. I know when you first got this job, I sent you a message. I'm like, your role is perfect. It's perfect for you. So I love what you're doing.
And you're very lucky clients. have to be happy that you're in your consulting biz. And I also just have to say, again, our listeners can't see it, but you have the most fabulous, beautiful tulips behind you. I love all the color. And I tell you, anytime I can spend 30 minutes with you, Debbie, I'm going to do it. It's sure been a pleasure.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. Well, thank you so much, Joy. I really appreciate you being on the show.
My pleasure.
Okay, bye-bye.